Pull up a chair, little one. Come a little closer. The fire's warm enough, and the night outside is cold, just the way a good story needs it to be. I want to tell you about a man named Elias Ward, and a horse named Storm Grace, in a town called Dry Creek, and what happens when a person who has lost nearly everything decides that one more living thing is worth fighting for. This is the kind of story that starts in the dark, in the middle of a blizzard, on a mountain road in Colorado that nobody with any sense would be riding. But then, some of the best stories in this world start exactly that way. Not in comfort, not in daylight, not in safety. They start in the cold, where the wind bites through your coat and the snow doesn't care who you are or what you deserve. Now, before I tell you what happened that night, you need to understand who Elias Ward was. He wasn't a great man, not by the measure most towns use. He didn't own much. He didn't say much. He didn't carry himself like someone who expected anyone to look at him twice. By the time the story takes place, most people in Dry Creek had stopped noticing Elias at all. He was like an old fence post, still standing, still there, but so familiar in its brokenness that nobody thought to look at it anymore. It hadn't always been that way. Once, Elias had owned land. Not a great stretch of it, not the kind that makes men powerful or famous, but enough. Enough to plant things in. Enough to build something small and true on. Enough to wake up in the morning with a feeling in your chest that said, "This is mine, and I am tending it, and that means something." The drought king the way droughts always come in those mountain towns. Slow at first. Then all at once. The first dry season wasn't so bad. A man can survive one bad year. But the second year was worse than the first. The wells dropped. The grass turned brown. The cattle grew thin. Elias found himself making the kinds of decisions that feel like slowly cutting off fingers. Which bill can I delay? Which animal can I sell? Which necessity can I pretend is at one? By the third year, the debt had grown into something that sat on his chest like a stone. He borrowed. He worked other men's land for wages, coming home at night to his own land and knowing, somewhere in the part of himself he didn't like to visit, that it wasn't really his anymore. The bank took it on a Tuesday in October. A man in a clean coat rode out, handed Elias some papers, and that was that. The land that he had poured years into became, in the space of a quiet afternoon, someone else's asset. Elias moved into a shack on the edge of town. Boards that didn't quite fit together. A roof that let the wind through in winter. He patched it with old lumber and tar paper and kept mostly out of the worst weather. He worked odd jobs. Dug ditches. Mucked stalls. Hauled wood for other men's fireplaces while his own stayed cold. He ate when he had money and went without when he didn't, and he learned not to think too hard about the difference. People in Dry Creek were not cruel to him, exactly. They just looked past him. The way people do with someone who has fallen so far that looking at them feels uncomfortable, like catching a reflection of something you'd rather not think about. Some called him unlucky. Some called him foolish. Most just didn't call him anything at all. The space inside Elias where hope used to live had gone very quiet. That quiet is important. Remember it. On the night this story really begins, the blizzard had been building for 2 days. The kind of storm that old-timers recognized by the color of the sky the evening before, a sick yellowish gray, like a bruise forming under the skin of the clouds. Everyone said, "Stay home." Most people listened. Elias didn't have any particular reason not to. No job was waiting. No one expected him anywhere. But that quiet inside him had been pressing harder than usual that day. Some days the emptiness gets loud in a way that walls can't contain. He didn't have anywhere to go. He just couldn't stay still. So he saddled his old gelding and rode out into the storm. The wind hit him like a fist. Snow fell sideways, thick and blinding, filling his collar, working through every gap in his coat until he was cold in places he forgot could get cold. The road north of town disappeared under the drifts almost immediately. His horse moved forward by instinct more than sight. Elias rode with his head down and his hands numb on the reins. He was just moving, the way a man sometimes has to when standing still gets too heavy to bear. Then he heard it. At first he thought it was the wind changing pitch. Storms do that. They find different registers, and sometimes late at night when you're tired and cold, the wind can sound like crying. It's easy to dismiss. Elias almost did. But the sound came again. Faint. Broken. Threaded through with something the wind didn't have and couldn't fake. Pain. Real pain. The kind that has weight, that sits in the chest of the listener and makes them stop. His gelding felt it too. The old horse snorted and shifted, ears flattening, the particular nervousness of an animal that has heard something it recognizes as distress. Elias pulled up. He sat still in the saddle and listened past the storm. There it was again. A cry. Weak and ragged and broken. Unmistakable. A horse. He swung down from the saddle, sank to his knees in the drift, tied his horse to a pine tree that was barely holding its own against the wind. Then he walked toward the sound, step by heavy step, breaking through crusted snow, hauling himself back up when he broke through, moving towards something he couldn't yet see. He found her at the base of a twisted tree. She was a Mustang. Wild. Dark-coated, the kind of horse the mountains occasionally produce that looked like it belonged to a different, older world. Her coat was crusted with ice and dark with dried blood. One hind leg was twisted beneath her at an angle that made Elias's stomach drop. Her sides heaved with pregnancy, the full heavy inside her, each breath shallow and labored. Around her neck hung the torn remains of a rope. Not a natural thing. Someone had put that rope there. And she had chewed through it, worn herself to nothing fighting it, and crawled this far before the storm and the wound and the weight she carried had finally brought her down. Elias knelt beside her in the snow. Wild Mustangs do not let men come close. Every instinct in a wild horse, built over generations of survival on open land, says that a man approaching means danger. They fight. They flee. Or, when they can do neither, they die raging. This mare did none of those things. She opened her eyes when Elias knelt. Deep brown eyes, dark as creek water in shadow. Exhausted eyes. Pain-filled eyes. But not the eyes of an animal lost to fear. They held something else. Something Elias recognized, because he had seen it in his own mirror on more than one bad morning. Endurance. The particular dignity of a living thing that has been brought very low and has not yet stopped. She watched him. She did not fight. He sat there for a moment, snow piling on his shoulders, wind screaming overhead, and he looked at this horse who had fought a rope and a trap in a blizzard and was still here. Still present in the world despite every reason not to be. "If you won't give up," he said softly, "then neither will I." He shrugged off his coat. His only coat. Laid it over her shaking body. The cold hit him immediately, total and complete. His skin tightened. His breath came short. He started digging anyway. No tools. Just his hands. He clawed snow away from her body, pack by frozen pack. He cleared around her legs and pressed his shoulder against her flank and pushed with everything he had. She groaned, a low and terrible sound, and for a moment nothing moved. Then she lurched, one massive effort, finding something in herself that she hadn't spent yet, and she rolled forward onto firmer ground, free of the drift. Elias nearly fell beside her. He caught himself on his hands and knees and breathed, and then he found the frayed rope and began the careful work of coaxing her to her feet. She resisted once, briefly, muscle memory of what a rope near her neck had always meant. But the fight left her almost immediately, and she settled, leaning into him slightly, trembling, and let him lead her. Step by painful step, through the storm, back toward the road. Back toward town. They made a strange procession through the dark, the old gelding, the man in his shirt sleeves, and the limping, ice-crusted, pregnant wild horse walking close beside him like she had decided, in her exhaustion, that this one human might be worth the risk. By the time the lights of Dry Creek appeared through the snow, Elias couldn't feel his arms past the elbows. He got her into the old cattle shed behind his shack. Spread what hay he had. Got a fire going in the rusted brazier. The storm battered the walls, but inside the cold eased, not gone, not warm, but survivable. The mare lay down in the hay. Her breath was visible in the air, but steadier now. Less ragged. The simple fact of being out of the wind had given her something back. Elias sat down in the dirt beside her and watched the rise and fall of her sides. Regular. Steady. Alive. For the first time in months, something shifted in the quiet place inside him. "You made it through," he said softly. "So I'll call you Storm Grace." He looked at her, battered, stubborn, still here. "Because that's what you are." The mare flicked one ear in his direction. Elias took it. He sat beside her until the brazier burned low, and then he let himself sleep. Morning came gray and subdued. The storm had eased but not left. Elias could see, in the clear light of day, what the dark had hidden. The leg was badly swollen and hot to the touch. The rope burns on Grace's neck were deep and weeping, and the full inside her was coming soon. Hours, not days. He needed help and he needed it now. In Dry Creek, if you needed something done, you went to Clara Boone. Clara ran the smithy at the end of the main street. She had taken over the forge from her father and made it her own, not just horseshoes and hinges, but medicines too, remedies she had learned from an old woman who lived in the mountains and knew things most doctors didn't. Clara was strong in the way that working iron makes you strong, not for show, but genuinely, in the core of her. She watched. She weighed things before she spoke. Elias came through her door looking like something the blizzard had nearly finished. "Ward," she said, setting down her hammer. "You look worse than usual." "There's a mare," Elias said. "Wild. Hurt bad. Pregnant." Clara didn't laugh. Didn't question. She grabbed herbs, cloth, a kettle, and a jar of dark paste, and walked with him back to the shed. She worked with calm focus, cleaning the wounds, binding the leg, applying the paste to Grace's neck. The mare flinched at the sharpest moments but did not fight. Then Clara's hands stilled. She was studying Grace's neck closely, the way she looks when something isn't adding up. "These aren't accident marks," she said. Her voice was quiet, but something hard ran underneath it. Someone burned her. With iron. Before Elias could respond, the shed door opened. Sheriff Abel Harlow stepped inside, snow on his coat, thin amusement on his face. "Ward," he said. "Always finding trouble." "She would have died out there," Elias said. Harlow shrugged. "Wild horses' property. If she lives, sell her. If she dies, bury her." He turned and left, his laughter fading into the wind. The silence afterward had weight. "She didn't come to you by chance," Clara said quietly. "Wild horses don't trust men. Not unless they've learned something about what happens when they don't." Elias looked at Grace. He nodded once. The storm returned that night. Wind shook the shack, and Grace began to pace. Elias knew the signs. He ran through the snow to Clara's smithy and hammered on the door, and she was already pulling on her coat when she opened it. because Clara was always half ready for the next emergency. They ran back together. The shed was transformed into something ancient and urgent. Grace was on her side, her contractions long and hard, her breath coming in bursts. She was trying. She was trying so hard. But she was also exhausted in a way that went deeper than the night before, exhausted from the rope and the trap and the cold and the long fight across the mountain. Elias went to her head. He knelt in the hay and held her face in his hands and talked to her. Not in commands, not in instructions. Just words, low and steady. I am here. I am not going anywhere. You are not alone in this. Clara worked at the other end, fast and precise, her hands knowing what to do. Grace screamed once. High and terrible, cutting through the stone like a blade. Then she strained, everything she had left going into one long trembling effort. And a small, slit body slid into the hay. Silence. One terrible second. Then the foal gasped and cried out. Small and thin and wavering. Alive. Tears burned down Elias's face, and he didn't try to stop them. Clara sat back on her heels and pressed her hands to her cheeks and breathed out a long, shaking breath. Storm Grace lifted her exhausted head toward the foal, and what came into her eyes then was something no amount of suffering had managed to put out. Love. Clear and unmistakable as daylight. The foal shook its head, sneezed, and immediately began struggling toward its feet with the cheerful determination of a creature that doesn't yet know the word impossible. Elias laughed. Raw and surprised, the laugh of a man who has nearly forgotten what it feels like. Clara laughed too. The shed was briefly warm with it. Then Storm Grace went still. Ears flat. Eyes sharp and fixed on the door. Elias stepped outside with the lantern. The snow was fresh and undisturbed in the yard, except for the footprints. 2 sets, coming from the east, stopping close to the shed wall, then retreating. Recent. Maybe minutes ago. Someone had been standing outside in the storm, listening. He went back inside. Clara read his face. They'll come back, she whispered. Elias looked at Grace curved around her foal. He looked at the small dark body already pressed against its mother's warmth. He thought about the iron rope, the burns, the man who had planned all of it. Then, Elias said, his voice quiet and level, they'll have to go through me. He kept watch through the long dark hours until morning. The storm loosened its grip over the next 3 days. Dry Creek emerged slowly, blinking, glad to be through. In the shed, a different kind of life had taken root. The foal was startling in its resilience, wobbling to its feet on the 2nd day, taking laps around the shed by the 3rd, already carrying the stubbornness of its mother like something inherited. Grace watched it with fierce, careful attention. Her wounds were healing. She was eating. She was going to be all right. But the footprints in the snow haunted Elias. Someone knew. Someone was planning. On the 4th morning, he saddled his gelding before dawn. Storm Grace rose when he moved to go, and he turned and said no, stay, and she planted her hoofs with an expression that meant, I will do no such thing. So she went with him. They climbed through the cold morning to the ridge north of town. Halfway up, Elias knelt and brushed snow from the ground. Wagon tracks, deep and heavy, pressed into the frozen earth before the storm hit. No settler hauled the wagon this way in a blizzard. He followed the tracks until something dark glinted under the snow. An iron trap, its jaws wide and cruel, stained dark with old blood. This was where Grace had been caught, where she had torn herself free. Farther on, the trees opened into a hollow. Broken wooden posts jutted from the snow, ropes frozen in place, horsehair caught in splintered boards. A holding pen, built for many horses. Not just one. They were gathering the herd. That night Elias rode to the cabin by the frozen creek, where an old man named Ezekiel Whitaker had lived for 4 years and knew these mountains better than any map. Whitaker opened the door and looked past Elias at Storm Grace in the snow and said, without surprise, "You brought one back. I wondered when it would happen." Elias told him everything. Whitaker listened and stirred his fire. "The herd never left," the old man said. "People said they were gone. But I've seen signs for years. Silver Hollow still holds them. Someone's hunting them," Elias said. Whitaker nodded. "A man with money and no soul." He named the ranch owner, the biggest in the county, the one who paid the sheriff generously and sat on the town council and contributed to charity drives and was, in the specific way of men who use respectability as camouflage, perfectly placed. "They'll come for your mare," Whitaker said. "In for the foal." Elias rode back in silence, the weight of truth heavy around his shoulders. That night, Storm Grace lifted her head and cried out into the dark. Long and clear. Not from pain. Not from fear. A call. It rolled across the hills and into the mountains, and after a moment, from the direction of Silver Hollow, something answered. Faint. Like far-off thunder. She wanted to go home. Clara argued the next morning. The foal was barely a week old. Grace's leg wasn't healed. But when Elias explained what the call meant, what the answer had meant, Clara pressed her lips together, looked at Grace, and said, "All right. But we prepare." They climbed together in the clear morning, Elias, Clara, the gelding, Grace, and the foal bouncing along on legs that had grown more reliable by the hour. Grace set the pace in the direction. Elias followed her lead. The land opened without warning. Silver Hollow was everything the old stories promised. A broad valley cradled between ridges, angled to catch the southern light even in the depths of winter. Grass showed through the frost in pale gold patches. A stream ran clear and audible beneath its skin of ice. The air was different here, cleaner, as if the hollow had its own arrangement with the sky. Then the ground trembled. He heard it through his boot soles first, the deep rhythmic thrumming he recognized before he understood it. Storm Grace cried out. And they came. They poured into the hollow from the north, flowing through the gap in the ridge like a river finding its course, and the word that came to Elias was, alive. Dozens of mustangs, black and bay and roan and gray, their manes thrown back, their hoofs throwing up curtains of frost and snow. Everything the town had said was gone. Wild and free and entirely themselves. Grace surged forward. The foal sprang after her. The herd slowed and circled, individuals touching Grace with their noses, reading the story of what had happened to her in the way that horses read each other. Elias stood at the edge of a hollow and could not have spoken if he'd wanted to. Then he saw the traps. Fresh iron jaws set along the valley edges, their mechanisms gleaming and new. Wagon tracks cutting deep scars through the valley floor. And then the riders appear on the far ridge, one by one, spreading out along the high ground. 8 of them. Armed. Patient. Arranged with the confidence of people who expect things to work. The man at the front reined in his horse and looked down at the hollow with the expression of someone surveying an inventory. "Well, now," he called, his voice carrying in the cold air. "Looks like you found my investment." Elias raised his rifle. His heart hammered in his ears. He was one man. One rifle. 8 riders, and they were calm in the way of men who believe the ending already belongs to them. "They don't belong to you," Elias said. The man smiled. "Everything does," he said, "if you're willing to take it." Storm Grace stepped forward. Even hurt, even tired, even carrying the weight of everything the last week had cost her, she stepped forward. She placed her scarred body between Elias and the riders, and stood there with her head straight and her eyes level and her feet planted in the frozen grass of Silver Hollow. She did not look afraid. The herd shifted and gathered behind her. Dozens of horses forming a living wall, hooves stamping, muscles coiled. And for the first time since the riders appeared, the man at the front looked less certain. Then Elias heard something else. From the trail he and Clara had climbed. Footsteps. Many of them. Clara had sent word that morning, quietly, while Elias prepared, to the smithy, the feed store, the family she knew. People who had heard about the mare in Elias's shed. People who had been watching the powerful do as they pleased for long enough that the sight of one poor man refusing to be moved had lit something in them that had been going dark. They came up the trail with torches burning in the gray morning, with coats waving, blocking the narrow passes the riders would need. They spread across the hollow's edges and stood there, the ordinary people of Dry Creek, choosing, some of them for the first time, to be something more than silent. The hunters panicked. The herd moved. Storm Grace cried out and the Mustangs surged as one, hoofs striking the ground in a roar, crashing through trap lines, snapping ropes, sending iron jaws flying. The careful geometry of the hunters' plan dissolved in less than a minute. Riders were thrown. Horses reared. Men who had been calm became men who were afraid, and fear made them run. One rider broke through toward the south end where the foal sheltered near the rocks. Elias saw it and ran and knew he was too far. Storm Grace was faster. She turned from the center of the herd and charged across the hollow, ignoring her bad leg entirely in a burst of pure protective fury. She struck the rider's horse full in the chest and sent both tumbling into the snow, and she stood over them for one long moment, enormous and certain, before turning back to her foal. The rider scrambled up and ran. The herd poured through the far end of the hollow and out through the northern pass, their hoofs fading into the distance until only the echo remained, and then the echo too was gone, and Silver Hollow was quiet. Elias dropped to his knees in the snow. He was shaking. He was breathing in great ragged gasps. He became aware of his body all at once, the burn in his lungs, the cold against his face, the rifle still in his hands. Then Clara's hand on his shoulder. "They're free," she said, her voice trembling. "All of them. They're free." The ranch owner sat his horse for a long moment on the empty ridge, looking at what remained of his plan, sprung traps, broken stakes, townspeople standing at the hollow's edges watching him. Then he turned and rode away without a word. Storm Grace came back. Slowly, her sides heaving, her breath heavy. She found the foal and pressed her nose to its face and held it there, and the foal pressed back. Then she raised her head and looked at Elias. Those deep brown eyes. The ones he had first seen in a snowdrift, full of endurance. They were different now, not in color or shape, but different the way the sky is different after a storm has finished. Clear. Open. At peace. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned and walked slowly toward the trail that led back down the mountain, the foal at her side. Elias got up out of the snow and followed her home. They returned to Dry Creek changed. All of them. Words spread the way good things spread, faster than rumor, slower than lies, but in the end more durable than either. People came to see the mare. Quietly, in ones and twos. Standing at the shed door and looking at the dark horse and the dark foal and the man who sat with them, and going away without saying much. But coming. The sheriff stopped laughing. The ranch owner stopped showing his face in town. The shed was repaired one morning while Elias slept. He woke to 3 men and 2 women already pulling boards and hammering and asking where he kept his nails. Feet appear at his door in sacks, no note attached. Help arrived without being asked, which is the best kind, because it comes without the debt that asking creates. Elias no longer ate alone. Storm Grace healed, slowly and proudly. The limp never fully faded, the leg was what it was, and no amount of good care could undo what the trap had done. But she moved through the world with the particular dignity of a creature that has survived something and knows it. The limp was part of her story, and she wore it the way you wear the marks of things you've endured, not with shame and not with display, but simply as part of who you are now. The foal grew with a joy that was almost aggressive. It kicked at sunlight, startled at shadows, and then charged them. Ran circles around the yard so fast that watching it made you dizzy. Grace watched it with the patient amusement of a mother who is quietly proud of what she made. Clara kept coming, first to check on the wounds. Then, when the wounds no longer needed checking, for other reasons that neither she nor Elias felt any urgency to name, she would sit on the fence rail of the repaired shed and drink the coffee Elias made, and they would watch the foal run its ridiculous circles, and the conversations they had were the kind that build something between people without announcing themselves. Some nights, when the wind shifted, Elias would step out onto the porch and listen. There, on the edge of hearing, was something that might have been the mountain breathing, or the wind through the high passes, or it might have been hooves, many hooves, moving through the dark above Silver Hollow, free and unhurried. Clara would come to stand beside him on those nights. She didn't ask what he was listening for. She already knew. In the spring, when the snow pulled back and the mountain grass came green again, the horses came lower. Not all of them, and not close, and not for long. But in the early mornings, from the high pasture behind the shed, you could see them on the ridge. A dark line of shapes against the pale morning sky, standing and watching with curiosity rather than fear. Whitaker, when Elias told him, nodded slowly. She told them, the old man said. Wild things have long memories. They remember what helped them and what hurt them. He looked at Elias. So do people, if they're paying attention. Elias thought about that for a long time. Now we come to the end of this story, or what passes for an end, because stories like this one don't really end. They change shape. They become part of the land they happen on, something that people carry and pass along, the way you're passing it along right now by listening. Elias Ward did not become rich. He did not get his land back. He did not become someone that newspapers write about. He remained, in most of the ways the world measures things, a modest man in modest circumstances. But he was no longer invisible. He was the man who had gone out into the blizzard for no reason except that something in him couldn't stay still. The man who had taken his coat off in a snowstorm and laid it on a horse. The man who had pushed with everything he had against something heavy and cold, and felt it move. The man who had stood in Silver Hollow with one rifle and no plan, and something had happened anyway. Storm Grace lived a long time after that. Long enough to become something of a legend in the valley, the limping wild mare, the scarred survivor, the horse that led the herd to safety. People made up pieces of the story to fill the gaps, the way people do, which is how legends grow. She was said to predict weather. She was said to be touched by the mountains themselves. Elias knew the truth, which was both simpler and more remarkable. She was a horse who had refused to stop, who had chosen, in a moment of extreme pain and danger, to let one human close enough to help her. And she had repaid that help with a loyalty and courage that most people he had known couldn't match. She had looked at him in a snowdrift with tired eyes and shown him something he had needed to see. That surviving wasn't the same as living. That endurance without something to endure for is just waiting. That there was still, somewhere inside the cold and the loss and the long quiet, a place for hope to take hold. That's the story I wanted you to hear, little one. Not because it ends with someone winning a fortune, or defeating an enemy in some final, complete way. The most important kind of victory is smaller than that. The most important kind is the moment when you hear something crying in a blizzard and you get off your horse. When you put your coat on something that needs it more than you do. When you push with everything you have against something heavy, and it moves. Hope, Elias learned, is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come in daylight on a clear day when everything is going well. Sometimes it comes buried in snow, wounded and forgotten, at the end of a road no sensible person would ride. Sometimes it looks at you with tired eyes in the dark. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to answer it, it changes everything. Now, time to sleep. The fire's still warm, and the mountains are quiet tonight. And somewhere up in those dark hills Storm Grace is running where she was always meant to run. In a valley where the grass grows green under the frost and the sky comes all the way down to rest on the ridge. She earned that. And so did the man who found her.